Very brief introductions. Well, I think actually, as Liz did, Donna actually, prior to joining Pipestream, Donna was also the CCO of AIG, so I think has a lot of solid experience in the insurance business. And it's nice to have John here because it's nice to have an underwriter up on the podium. So I've got some interesting questions that I want to get into with you. But if I might go back for a second, I really find it interesting to talk about the fact the one of the things you mentioned was, I'm going to go sit over here, was the possibility of business model redos. Obviously, you've got the experience with the pets and the motorcycles with Allstate, but aren't those by and large relatively new product offerings that really maybe they didn't need to be created, if you will? And so how do a lot of these companies start to think about business model redos? Because I think there's probably a lot of truth to that in many respects.
I think you have to really know your customers, and you have to think about where you fit in their real life. It's very easy for us to get very insular and think that it's all about insurance, and it's not. I'm sorry, it's not. So if you're a company that sells or writes homeowners insurance, what if you redefined yourself as a company for homeowners, which includes insurance, but might include things like real estate sales or construction or contracting or maintenance schedules or redecorating or all those things that go along with being a home. It's easy to think about this when it comes to personal lines, but think about it for commercial lines as well. Suppose you focus on restaurants. What are restaurateurs interested in? Well, they're probably interested in things like food safety and cutting costs on food and new menus and how do you handle temporary workers and staff and can they talk to other people? And so why not set up a community where restaurateurs can talk to each other or where they can get advice from your loss control engineers or they can get discounts on products? I mean, there's things that you can do if you define yourself differently, right? It's like, we've defined ourselves as buggy whips and we need to think of ourselves as transportation.
John, you've got a technology background at an insurance company. Talk about that and what you've found since you've been with the insurance company, and talk about your experience here. And I have other questions, and then I have some questions of you as well.
Sure. So I'm relatively new to the, at least P&C insurance industry. So I've been with Capital Insurance Group for about 2 years. So it's been interesting for me, and I think sort of the theme, we've used different terms, and not just in this session, but before, is that the bar really is low. So one of the benefits of being in this industry, from my perspective, is it makes me feel like I'm smarter than I actually am, because the stuff we're talking about is stuff that a lot of people were doing 10 or 20 years ago, whether it's data or building a compelling user experience or understanding who your customers are, whatever those cases may be. But I would agree to a large degree. There was a comment that was made in the earlier session, which is, I think, a better term than I came up with myself, which was the grudge purchase, I believe was your reference earlier. And I think, from my perspective, what you were just saying really resonates with me. We're dealing with a product that people either pay for and don't use, which is not going to be a great experience, or they pay for and think of the circumstances in which they need to use them. The car that I love just crashed. It's great that it's covered, but all I'm thinking about is that thing that I loved just got destroyed. House, car, business, whatever the case may be. So when I'm envisioning from a customer experience perspective what that should be, insurance is a very challenging and compelling industry and domain to have a great customer experience, right? I mean, I'm paying for something I don't use, that sucks. I'm paying for something I do use, that sucks more, right? I don't know where you end up positive on that. But from my perspective, what you were saying really did resonate, because if we change, I don't know about reinventing the business model. From my perspective, there's a lot that we can do to articulate better what the value is in ways that are more resonant. We've just, as an industry, again, coming in from the outside, so apologies if I offend anybody who I haven't already, my perspective is that we've just been lazy for a long time. We've got a lot of folks that are just automatically renewing their business, and they expect to pay it like they expect to pay taxes. They have to do it. They don't like doing it. It's that grudge purchase. However, we can move out of that to really say, here's what you're really getting. The president of our company had referred to it as being in the life restoral business. And when you think of it in those terms, those things can resonate. And anything that's on the periphery of that in that ecosystem, I think if I say big data and agile, like I hit all the buzzwords and somebody can close their card out. But at that point, in that ecosystem, we're really talking about things that do provide value, that people do care about, and then there is an understanding of I'm paying this and I'm getting something for it that makes sense, and anything on the periphery of that that helps cement that relationship, I think makes an awful lot of sense. So I've answered a couple questions you didn't ask. I don't know if I've answered.
I'm going to come back because I do want to talk about your experience, and I don't know how much you feel comfortable talking about it, but I do want to come back, not yet, to your experience at the company in terms of working through an existing insurance company with your ideas and technology and how it's been received or not received. So you can think about it if you want to
Absolutely.
answer that.
Oh, I will. I probably shouldn't, but I will.
Okay. All right. Donna, secure messaging platform. Explain that.
Well, probably like many of you in insurance or any highly regulated environment, we struggle with how do you more deeply engage with your end users, whether they're policyholders or brokers or regulators or pick the stakeholder group, and still meet the compliance for regulation, for data privacy and security. And in my opinion and my experience, everything was way too socially architected and exposed my data. So I had literally searched the world over to try to find a way that I could accomplish this. And until very recently, in fact, about 2.5 years ago, I hadn't seen anything that existed that could meet all of those requirements. The other thing is, you think about how the world has changed, and I love the presentation. I mean, the variety, the velocity, the volume of change is only going to increase, and just keeping up is table stakes. I mean, how many of you used to do 5-year planning? I mean, I don't even know what that looks like now. So, how do you stay ahead of the curve on all those things that have to be considered and provide real functionality in this on-demand economy that we all find ourselves trying to live in? Has anybody ever heard the term FANG? Okay, well, I'm going to teach you something. It's Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, and Google. And those companies have redefined the space. We used to feel like we could crawl into the relative safety of our verticals and think about our competitors and who we thought they were. But now, I got to tell you, we live on this horizontal, and we're getting compared to some of the service delivery giants. So all those things in play, but still meeting the regulatory compliance and protecting our data, I think we're going to continue to struggle with a little bit.
Good luck.
Yeah.
Talk about your experience at AIG as it relates to this conversation, if it's applicable.
No, absolutely. And some of the things that you were saying, I mean, I feel like I was having this flashback because, some of the low-hanging fruit was in this federated model that a lot of enterprises have. And it's a lack of elegance in handoffs that happen, because here's a news flash. The customer doesn't care what department or function they're talking to. You're one company to them all the time, and treating them like that. And I loved putting the customer in the mix. I'd go out and I'd say, well, have you done customer journey mapping? Yes. Well, tell me how you did it. What was your approach? Well, we got in a room and we mapped out the customer's journey. I said, well, was the customer involved in that conversation? Because it sounds like you just did a workflow. Well, we're experts after all. They don't know what they need. And so, those were the kind of things that we were churning around at the time. And it was fascinating because I got the amazing opportunity to be part of the company when it paid back the tort money, which we did all the right things. We focused internally. And we committed ourselves to improving ourselves and to paying back the tort money with interest, for the record, thanks to Bob Benmosche and the leadership team. But what that also did was create some behaviors that we had almost lost as part of the vocabulary, the customer. So, how do you bring that back? And I love that you talked about a culture shift, because navigating those politics of change in an organization of scale is one of the really difficult things to do as well.
Okay, let's go. That's a great lead into you. Culture change, navigating any changes, technological changes that
Sure.
for 2 years, and how was your management? How did they view you coming on board?
They're very patient.
What were their goals for what they wanted you to accomplish?
Well, without going into details that may not be overly interesting to everybody, maybe not even me, when I came in, we had a couple of, and this is, I think, no surprise to anybody who's in the industry, a couple of large-scale implementations of new, core systems that were delayed, problematic, extraordinarily expensive. I'm sure that's news to everybody here.
That's
You're
probably
nodding as
consistent
if you've
across the
never heard of
board.
such a thing. Right, and not unique to our industry, but for some reason I came in, and this wasn't my background, everything was, when we talked to our integrator, everything was 18 months. For some reason in the insurance industry, it's just long enough to get a new CIO, I guess, and whatever decisions you make, it reset. But that wasn't really my background, so I was very fortunate. I came in when the bar was really low, which is always helpful. If you can do that, I recommend it highly. But also, I had a very supportive executive team. I had some things from a playbook that I've used before that aren't really unique. They're not, my background has been very much an agile-based approach. So we have a different approach to how we develop and deliver software, and that was new, and rolling that out and getting more business engagement and understanding. We talk about customer journeys, really actually sitting down and meeting with our customers. I think in the initial questions that we got, there was that sort of, I think the intentionally false choice to see if we could get anybody in a fight about who's the customer, if it's the, if it's the agent or if it's the insured, and so my thing was, well, they both are, but also we have a ton of internal customers. We've got underwriters, and we've got customer service folks, and we've got, so, yeah, well, try to not think about them, but we do. But anyway, so understanding all those constituencies and working with them was new, but we were very much supported, especially at the executive level, which was, I think, rare in a lot of cases. And they were very understanding of everything that and we wanted to do. I've got actually, a bunch of the folks that are part of our team actually joined here. You want to represent? Thank you. But that's really...
They look awfully young, by the way.
They do, yeah, we like to get them young before they have bad habits. But that really is part of the thing that we move towards an FTE-based model more than getting folks who are in the hundreds of dollars per hour, that adds up really quickly. So the executive support and understanding of some key changes as to how we would build and develop things really made all of the difference. Also, articulating these things as these are programs, not projects. So there are projects within programs, but understanding traditional, well, not traditional, but I think newer and more appropriate ways of managing programs, portfolios of programs and projects, and understanding that, that we move these things based on business priority and how they impact the bottom line in more thoughtful ways, and looking at the entire portfolio rather than thinking we're going to have some big win, we're going to roll out some new system, and suddenly magic happens. All of those sorts of things, support at that level was essential.
But can I say, I want
please.
to interject, follow up on this, because you are very similar to a lot of insurance companies who have spent years and years and years replacing the core systems. And you have to look at this trajectory for insurance companies. The old COBOL-based systems, which were state-of-the-art back in the 60s. We were so the leaders when it comes to technology back in the 60s, right? They were very good at processing transactions, and they're very good at counting money. The newer systems, the modern systems that you're in the middle of implementing, are very, very good at optimizing the workflow inside an insurance company. They are not good at delivering a customer experience. To deliver a customer experience requires a lot of other kinds of capabilities, whether it's artificial intelligence or video communications or the Internet of Things or chatbots or working with distribution channels or mitigation devices. There's all these other things that have to talk to the core systems. Now, if you're an insurance company and you've just spent 4 years implementing your core system and you think you're finally done, and you suddenly now have to put together an ecosystem of all of these other providers, all of you insurtech startups are going to have to plug into these core systems. And an insurance company, you're going to have a full-time staff if you have to choose each one of those individually and plug them in individually and manage and maintain those relationships of that entire ecosystem. So this movement to customer service, using all of these cool things that you guys are thinking of, is going to be extraordinarily difficult for an insurance company.
Yeah, well, I think for us, certainly, picking individual, modular components doesn't scale extraordinarily well. But there are still a bunch of opportunities. You know, we're here as much to listen to the folks who are pitching as much as we are to talk. But we struggle, you know, we have, as we talk about customer journey, you know, the idea is it's behavioral economics for us as well. We want to make it as easy as possible. The idea of you're going to get a quote for a bot policy, that data is out there, whether it's CoreLogic or somebody in this room or someone else is pulling in this data. The less that folks have to, even if they've got it in their system of record in the AMS, wherever that data can be pulled, whatever we can do to make that easier from a technology perspective, if we can deal with a smaller number of folks who have nailed that problem, at the end of the day, we are just trying to make that as easy as possible, and that's how we'll win. If you can do a BOP with, you know, entering one or two, you know, pieces of information, hitting a button, and then we've got tons of services and connections to APIs, but we don't have to actually have relationships with 20 different providers, that actually will very much help us win.
Yeah, that shift to a microservices kind of an architecture, which is something everybody in the room should be thinking about. How do you enable that so that an insurance company can scale as they begin to use these new capabilities?
Donna, any thoughts on all this conversation here?
No, actually, it's fascinating because it's what we're already doing. And I will tell you, the availability of APIs is a huge differentiator. You know, it makes no sense for most enterprises to go rip out the legacy systems and replace it with new systems, not only from a capital perspective, but depreciation will bite you in the butt too pretty quickly. So we have literally done integrations into systems that still have a green screen in this industry. For those of you who are around to remember. But what it's done too is it's breathed new life into those old systems where the data lives. And then the magic of automation, by any other word, chatbots, to push and pull that data around to get to resolution. Because here's something else I'll tell you. Your customers don't always expect to be delighted. They expect to get solutions. And so designing for as close to 100% resolution on the front end, because you know, trying to automate broken processes just pisses more customers off more quickly than you ever did before. So I don't recommend that. But
Okay. All right. Any questions in the audience at all? I want to make sure you're all awake out there. So the first person with a question gets a gift. Oh.
It's always tough to go right after lunch.
Nope. Okay.
I do have a question for
You
you.
have one.
So,
Go ahead.
traditionally, the marketing group has owned the customer internally. Is that a fair statement?
No.
Okay.
When you say the marketing group, can you be
Well,
specific?
meaning that you have, you know, externally we all talk about who owns the customer, right? There's all that kind of conversation. So when you bring that conversation internal to the organization, someone has responsibility for that customer. And what I have seen is that you have, as more and more data is coming into the organization and people are trying to manage that data, that you have conversations that didn't occur before between the CIO and let's say the marketing team and trying to sort through that and trying to figure that out. So, I mean, how have you seen that in your organizations and how has that worked?
Well, I'll tell you, I can't agree that marketing has traditionally owned the customer, because what I have seen is that underwriting owns the new business and the underwriting process, and finance owns the billing side of it, so they own the customer there, and the claims people definitely own claims. There's nobody mucking around what they do. Now, the marketing has owned the customer. If you consider the customer to be the agent, then they have owned that. But if you look at the customer as the policyholder, it has been extremely siloed. So we've seen this new position, customer experience officer, and I'm seeing people do it very differently. Some people are treading very lightly. They're saying, we're going to start with things like net promoter scores and pulling in data to get a view of the customer. We're not changing your processes. And other people are saying, no, I'm sorry, we're changing the way that you're doing claims. We're changing the way that you are communicating with the customers in terms of the billing. We're actually going to intervene there. And this is part of what creates this cultural, challenge, right? Because if you're the chief underwriting officer, you don't expect that a chief customer experience person is going to change the way you underwrite. And yet, we're starting to see some of that happening. So who owns the customer? It's still, I think, from my experience, is quite siloed in the insurance industry.
well, and in my experience, it's been based on the numbers. everybody owns the customer or nobody owns the customer, depending on, how the numbers look. The problem, speaking from experience again, with having somebody who is overarching the entire enterprise, which is, wouldn't that be nirvana? But I think silos are the organizational cockroaches who are going to outlive us all. It always amuses me when people talk about busting down silos and things. So I think, to have that person given a seat at the senior table and making sure that there is this overarching understanding and alignment of goals, because unfortunately, a lot of times that role doesn't have authority over the areas that some of the change needs to manifest. So, will that change, or will, the word on the street is chief customer officers maybe have the life expectancy of a goldfish. I don't know. But we'll have to wait to see.
Hopefully longer.
Well, and I was going to make a joke too, because
That happens a lot in my general direction.
Wait, how long is his
I
life
saw
expectancy?
a cartoon the other day that said CIO stands for career is over. Have you seen that?
No.
It's a tough panel.
On that note, any other questions?
Maybe I can move into that chief customer role now.
Anybody else out there? No? Okay. So is it more important to focus on the front end or the back end in terms of digitization? Like the front end customer experience, or deal with the claims and get that straightened out? If you're going to take $1 and do one or the other.
Is that for me?
That's whoever wants to answer it.
Yeah, that was one of the ones that I thought was sort of the false dichotomy. I don't think that we, and it may vary by folks, our organization is structured by program team. So we don't have the luxury. We try to focus on each program of doing the most important thing at that given point in time. But the idea of choosing one over the other just really doesn't work. I think, ecosystem is the term that comes to mind to me. Having a solid front end, but an antiquated back end. Then there's things you can do. I've done the screen scrape thing with green screens. It's embarrassing, but sometimes it works. Whatever it takes to get there, that's great. What I've seen, and I think my folks, maybe most of you in the room can attest to this, though, is in an ecosystem, the whole lipstick on a pig metaphor works really well. If you have a beautiful and elegant visual design, but you still have a process that ends up dropping something in a mailbox or worse for a customer service rep or an underwriter or anything else, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how beautiful something is because the experience is what's impacted. So, same thing on the back end. It's great if you've got back end processes and systems that, can do straight through underwriting and straight through processing. But if your front end is so difficult to navigate that folks can't get there, it doesn't matter. So to us, and the way that we're approaching that in terms of we rebuilt our portal at the same time that we deployed our first lines of business on our new core policy administration system. Peanut butter and jelly or whatever you want to call it, those two things were part of the same, because at the end of the day, and this is the one thing that I say to any of my folks that join the team, especially with technological backgrounds, is nobody cares about your technology, right? It's all about what the outcomes are. However you get there, right, you get there. So the fact that it's a different front end and a back end for us, our customers don't care, and they should never have to care. They shouldn't have to know where those pieces end the same way that silos with people or processes. The technology should do the same thing. We should get them what they need, and that's going to be fast and easy and intuitive. And you can't do, at least from my experience, the front end or the back end. You have to do both.
Yeah, I think you prioritize your capabilities based on which are going to reduce the most pain the fastest and cheapest. And it doesn't matter if it's the back end or the front end. Just use those dimensions.
Okay, so you talked a little bit about your experience. So you deal with both the North America and South America in terms of insurance companies. So is
And
there
software vendors, yeah.
And software? Okay, so what are you finding in terms of like working with your insurance companies and the vendors? What are some of the major things that that you're seeing? Are you seeing wholesale changes in terms of thought processes about dealing with these issues?
Oh, that's such a great question. Let me tell you a story. About 2 years ago, I went into a mid-sized insurance company. I'm not going to name or give any kind of information, give you any clue about who this company was. And they had asked me to come in and talk about trends in the business and what was going on. It was an educational kind of a day. And so I'm going through the trends, and I get to the bit about analytics. And the CEO says, oh, Carlin, move on from there. I think that's balderdash. And I said, oh, really? He said, yeah, I expect my underwriters to be experts. I expect my claims adjusters to be experts. I don't want the machine doing it. Let's move on. Okay, this is 2 years ago, right? Lucky all of you who are competing with them. Well, they go to another big InsurTech conference, and they walk in the room, and this was like deer in the headlights. And I run into them, Carlin, we got to have breakfast. And the CEO says, I had no idea that there was this much change. I had no idea that it had progressed this rapidly, this far. We need a strategy. We need a plan. And so this is part of what's happening on the carrier side. Some of the carriers are very, very ahead. I mean, they've got teams of people that are looking at this, investing in this. A lot of them have their venture funds or accelerators. They're on top of it. But if you look at the distribution of insurance companies in the United States anyway, it's kind of like this, right? I can't make that bottom big enough. My fingers don't do that. But there's, just a couple of folks. There's like 20 carriers over $5 billion in the property casualty world, and something like 800 that are below 100 million, right? And so you have very different levels. Those who are up at the top, they're on top of it. They are definitely doing very cool, interesting things. And those who are in the middle are kind of like, holy cow, what am I going to do? And so they're now starting to focus on their own digital strategies. We've seen a tremendous amount of core system replacement over the last 10 years. And that has created a lot of
Core system in what area?
Policy admin, billing, claims. A lot of that is done or close to being done. And so carriers have been able to, using these new configurable environments, move much more rapidly and do more with the same people, so they suddenly have capacity. And so we're seeing insurance companies saying, wow, we're suddenly realizing technology is actually kind of strategic. It's not just keeping lights on, it's actually about, it's like maybe as important as underwriting, I don't know. And the CEOs, though, are saying, well, I came up the underwriting ranks. I don't even know what questions to ask. I don't even know how to evaluate this. And so there's a lot on the insurance carrier side. There's a lot of people who are struggling to learn this, investing in this, putting these plans in place, trying to move very, very rapidly because the world has changed so quickly in so many ways.
So what about boards of directors? Have you had any experience in dealing with them as it relates to this?
Well, and the board of directors are similar in that, this is a part-time job for them, so they're not, am I still on? Yeah. It's a part-time job for them, so they're not always, I'm sorry, I feel like I'm not, okay. They're not always as well informed as well, and so a lot of the work that I do with the boards is, again, helping to educate them about what the changes are and what it means. And the thing that insurance companies have to watch out for is to not be blinded by the light, which is a great song, but it's also all these shiny objects, right? And this happens to insurance companies where a senior exec will read about some cool new thing and then come to the CIO and say, why haven't you implemented blockchain yet, right? Or whatever it is. And so some of the work that has to be done is educating people on how to think through the shiny objects and not be blinded and do the things that will carry their strategy forward.
That's really a great point, and I have to be cautious of how I bring this up. So how do carriers determine, I don't want to say the winners and losers, but how do carriers determine the right choices to make in terms of product A versus product B versus product C? You might have a great salesperson, you might have a great implementation team, you might have the best product over here. How do I mean, I don't know if there's any answer, but
I have a data set of 1, so I'm not sure if that's going to be really valuable. You both may have some better perspective. I'll share mine. But
I think it's really important to think about. Go ahead.
Well, no, I mean, from my perspective, I don't really care much for the sales pitch in most cases. It really is, in the blockchain example, that is an extraordinarily shiny object. But to me, I mean, I have a bit of an advantage of being a little bit slow compared to most of the folks that I work with. So my questions are very much, what problem are we solving, right? And at the end of the day, anybody, and this is far outside insurance or any domain, right? If we're talking about a customer, and I think you were very eloquent in your presentation, but it's all about who is your customer, and if you can't get laser focused on that, and then once you understand that, what the problem is that you're solving, the rest of it's noise. Blockchain, I'm sure there are great things, and it's theoretically interesting to me, but right now, we have real opportunities to do a better job, whether it's our small business for the BOP work that we're doing, how can we make that easier for the quoting and the buy process, and the binding and issuance, right? Maybe that's not sexy and exciting, but revenue and profitability is really sexy and exciting to me, so we start with those problems. And so anybody who gets in front of us with a solution, it's really, what problem are you solving, and how does it move the needle in quantifiable ways? And that's, but I would apply that to any offer that comes my way, is start with the problem, and then we'll talk about the technology, but if you start with the how, don't care.
Yep. And understanding your business is really probably the most important thing they can actually do right off the bat, I believe.
I would say that there are two things to really focus on. The first one is, if you're going to go after shiny objects, is this on? If you're going to go after shiny objects, make sure that they are aligned with your strategy. If your strategy is low cost, go for shiny objects that are going to cut your cost. If your strategy is high touch, go for shiny objects that will help you touch the customer better. If your strategy is product and underwriting and capacity, then go for things like data that will help you make better underwriting decisions. So first figure out your strategy, then identify the products that will help you deliver on that strategy. And when it comes to picking among them, I think you have to have a very objective process. Salespeople are professionals at selling, right? They are very good at not telling you what they can't do. Very good at this. And so you need a very objective process where you lay out specifically your requirements, and you have them tell you how they handle those requirements. You do demos of competing carriers or competing products, and you give them a script. So everybody has to show the same thing. And if they can't, they're not glossing over it. So I think a lot of folks, the way that they buy is they go to a conference, they see a demo at the booth, and then they say, oh, that's really cool, let's buy it. And that's not the best way of doing it.
That's a great points.
Yeah, and I would say, you're all here for a reason, and one of the things you can do in the way of really solid diligence is make sure that there's been a vetting of these startups and these new technologies and improvements that you can be applied to the business. So, bravo to you for doing this, because there's a lot of vaporware out there. So buyer beware. The other thing is, I would say, make sure that you've got the underpinning from the startup or the new project that you want to undertake with regulatory concerns. Like you said, not the sexy stuff, but the things that need to be taken care of really quickly. And then the third thing I would say is make sure that your data is protected, because you have exposures there. So I would put that rigor around your lens.
Any questions? Straight in the back.
Is it on? Just one quick one. Going back to what you guys were talking about, the chief customer officer. So I think for a lot of startups, it might seem like that's the place to go, or starting point. I know I've had experience myself. So, for these positions that are being created, just out of curiosity, maybe for sharing, who do you typically see these people reporting to within the organization? Where does their budget typically come from, if they even have one? And what sort of decision-making power, stroke P&L, do they hold to actually make decisions on which vendors they should be selecting for the company?
Well, most are figureheads, and somebody said earlier, it's, you talk the talk, and so just because you've checked the box and said, we're focusing on the customer experience, all of a sudden it's so. So many times, these roles don't have a budget, and they're charged with the dubious distinction of trying to, create some alignment within that herd of peers that they have. So they've got a full-time job doing that. In the best scenario, the chief customer officer reports directly to the CEO. I think that's really important, to get a seat at the table, to have regular reporting around the metrics and the difference that you're making, and then, being politically savvy to serve up some quick wins to your peer group to get even more alignment around what it is you're trying to do and change the world. But, I will tell you, some of the people who are best as inflection points are chief services officers or chief operating officers or those people who are running call center operations, because they're stuck in the middle. You know, they get the finger pointed at them whenever NPS scores drop or customer loyalty isn't where it needs to be. And then this chief financial officer is also pointing at them going, oh, and you got to reduce your budget by 30%. If you can solve problems for those people, you're in.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, for those of you that are selling into insurance companies, the business makes the decision. So go to sell to the business. Go sell to the chief underwriting officer, the chief claims officer, the chief operating officer, the services person. The CIO typically has veto power. And they will exercise that where necessary, but prefer not to. But the business is the one that makes the decision. So as you put together your own marketing, as you put together your own plans for how to engage with insurance companies, you have to be very crisp about how you will improve the business.
Yeah. And I'll close on that. So even if I'm empowered to make those decisions, and I often am, I am in lockstep with our COO and generally the president of the company all of the time. We don't, by design, I do not allow myself nor my team to make business decisions. They're business decisions. We make sure that the technology is appropriate, that it will address the needs that it needs to, and we deal with all of those details. But it's all about the business decisions behind it. You're absolutely correct.
Terrific. Well, I thank you all very much. It was a great panel, and thanks for your time. And so please thank everybody in the panel.